Hi, my name is Patrick McGorry. I'm a Professor of Youth Mental Health at the University of Melbourne in Australia and Origin Youth Health Research Centre. And I'm here at the APA here in May 2014, where I've just given a plenary lecture on transformational reform in youth mental health. There's a great need for a repositioning of psychiatry and mental health to focus on young people. And by young people we mean people in transition to adulthood, so from puberty through to the mid-20s, let's say 12 to 25 years. And this is because this is the peak period of onset for all the major adult period disorders like mood disorders, anxiety disorders, psychoses, drug and alcohol, personality, eating disorder, all the main persistent or potentially persistent problems of adult life. 75% of disorders appear before the age of 25. And despite this very high incidence and prevalence during this critical period of life, these young people have the worst access, believe it or not, across the whole lifespan to mental health care. It's kind of a shocking demonstration which we've seen now in surveys in many developed countries, and people are starting to wake up to the fact that we've designed and structured our services in a way that isn't really promoting early intervention and reducing the impact of mental disorders. Yeah, I think this issue has attracted controversy in a non-unexpected way because treatment in psychiatry is provided late, and it's often provided in a very narrow and crude way. So people reach immediately for drug therapies. They often respond in kind of coercive sort of ways to young people who are in desperate situations. The whole idea of early intervention is I suppose it frightens some people that we might be imposing these sorts of treatments on young people who are just struggling with life and perhaps in the earlier stages of a more mild or moderate problem. But the whole point is we need to offer what we call soft entry, so young people get access to care at the earliest possible point, at which point psychological and social and supportive sort of interventions, even quite simple things like exercise and information and support, will make a big difference. And those who don't respond to those simpler interventions can then progress to more, perhaps more intensive things like cognitive behavior therapy, other forms of psychosocial intervention, and if necessary, drug therapy. But I think in the US there's a tendency to equate treatment with drug therapy, which I suppose then worries a whole lot of people outside of the field, and particularly in the media and even some psychiatrists, that we might be inappropriately or over-treating some people. But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of young people don't get any kind of effective treatment, and that's the under-treatment problem is definitely a serious one, which is then overshadowed by these fears that people have. Well, we began with early intervention for psychosis, for psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, and we began probably with two things. The first was to try to shorten delay in treatment for first episode psychosis and make sure we treated people very carefully and in a sustained way in the early years of illness, in streamed cultures of care that were different from chronic patients and chronic cultures of care. And the second thing was to try to identify young people who had a need for care long before the first episode of psychosis actually appeared, the so-called prodromal period, which can last for up to several years. And we know that young people's lives really crumble during this period, even though they haven't fully manifested the psychotic disorder. They manifest more subtle manifestations. They manifest depression, anxiety, some negative symptoms. Their role functioning deteriorates, their peer relationships deteriorate, and everyone knows something's wrong, but because they haven't crossed the line into a diagnostic threshold, people hold back and they're concerned about intervening, or access to care is not supported by financial systems of healthcare. So basically what we're saying is we need to provide help to those young people. It doesn't necessarily mean drug therapy at all. That would be a late stage intervention. So this sort of work led to us developing a staging model of care which goes way beyond psychosis actually. It includes all mental disorders, and it capitalizes on the fact that the early manifestations of any disorder are fairly non-specific. Usually mixtures of depression, anxiety, distress, maybe relationship problems, impairment of role functioning. These are sort of non-specific and generic sort of indicators of a need for care, which then can be made more specific if a more specific syndrome like psychosis or mania or anorexia, let's say, emerges out of this non-specific matrix. And that's our staging model. We're looking at biomarker research in relation to that. We're looking at clinical trials based on this staging model, and it fits very well with the transformation services culture that we've actually engineered in Australia. So linked to this idea that we must provide a stigma-free environment for young people and families, and we must provide stepped or staged care, we have developed in Australia and increasingly in many other countries like Denmark, Israel, Ireland, maybe Canada and the US too, a primary care model of youth mental health called Headspace, which allows young people to seek help for any level of problem and get ready access to a multidisciplinary team in a primary care environment, a youth cafe type culture, but with clinical expertise nested within it. This is being rolled out now in up to 100 sites across Australia over the last few years. And it's really captured the imagination of the mental health field in many countries. It's, I think, going to solve many of the anxieties that people have felt about this early intervention work that has been going on. But it's only doing so because it's creating something new, something that's stigma-free, something that's very sensitive to the issues that people are concerned about, the premature use of drug therapies and the limited scope of therapy that people get. So it must be a holistic model. It must be a model that young people and families influence directly themselves. And this is what's happening in our country and hopefully in many other countries in the near future.